But we'll start with Chris, and Chris can introduce himself and tell you a little bit about his background. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you to Mark, and thank you for everyone who made the time to come. I really wasn't sure how full this room was going to be, how many people are actually going to want to hear about homeschooling, and thankfully there's a few of you, so thank you for that. I want to start this session by doing the impossible. I'm going to make a statement that I actually think an entire room full of libertarians will all agree with. Now, this is an impossible endeavour, as anyone who's been in the libertarian movement will know, but I'm going to try. Here's the statement. The purpose of raising children is to prepare them for adulthood. Can anyone disagree? Anyone want to raise a hand and say that the purpose in raising children is not to prepare them for adulthood? Mark today in your diaries, ladies and gentlemen. A room full of libertarians agreed on a statement. Okay, so this is the purpose for which we're raising children. Whether you're homeschooling or using a systemised form of schooling, outside of schooling, just the raising of children, the purpose is to prepare them for adulthood. The problem, and where I'm sure there would be a lot of disagreement, is what does prepared actually mean? At what point do we say you are now prepared to be an adult? For that matter, what is an adult? I am not going to attempt to answer any of these questions because we would probably devolve into a fist fight if we had so many disagreements on what that actually looks like. But I want to talk about prisons, a logical connection. I'm sure you can all see exactly where I'm going. If you can, please let me know because I'm not entirely sure. Take someone who's been in prison for 10 years. When they get released, they're given a halfway house. They're given a place where they can go that isn't prison, but isn't quite the real world yet, where there's some people who can kind of help them find their feet and get back into the real world. Because after 10 years of being told exactly what to do and how to live, they have become institutionalised. They don't know how to function in the real world anymore. Okay, take a child, and at 18 months of age, put them into preschool, then into primary school, then into high school, and then they go straight into university, and at 23 years of age, they come out very well educated and completely 100% institutionalised. I would argue if the goal of raising children is to prepare them for adulthood, or may I say it a different way, to prepare them for the real world, institutions are at an automatic disadvantage. I'm not saying it's impossible, but preparing someone for the real world inside an institution is like trying to box with one arm tied behind your back. You are at a huge disadvantage. The real world is the best place to prepare people for the real world. So, I think being prepared means three things. I think all we have to do is help children achieve competence in three areas for them to actually be able to succeed as adults. Those three are this. I think they need to be good with words. I think they need to be good with numbers. And I think they need to be good with other people. And I think anyone who reaches adulthood and has a decent level of competence in all three of those things is going to find their way through the world pretty well. It's not going to be too hard for them to find a place where they belong. But let's just take those three measurements, words, numbers, and social competence, let's call it. In the privacy of your own mind, answer for yourself, how well do you think that systemised education is doing at creating young people, young adults, adults eventually, who are competent in all three of those areas? I'm not going to give you my answer, but in the privacy of your own mind, give yours. I want to give you some anecdotes, some things that happened to me and things that I did as a homeschooler that would not have been possible had I been in an institutionalised learning environment. And I want you, as you listen to these anecdotes, to think about what I was learning about words, about numbers, about relationships with people, sometimes business relationships, sometimes personal relationships, and ask yourself whether maybe this completely, maybe seemingly directionless form of learning was maybe more effective than any institutionalised learning would be. The year was 1994, and I was 12 years old. I fancied myself as something of an inventor, and I had just had the idea that was going to change the world. You see, I'd been reading in a little physics textbook all about how the retention of momentum in wheels was affected by where the centre of gravity was relative to the hub and the rim. Okay? If you take a given weight of wheel and you put all the weight on the rim, it will continue to spin for longer than if you put all the weight near the hub. I thought, oh, that's fascinating. So if I'm riding my bicycle, because my bicycle was the most important thing in the world to me at 12 years of age, and I could have all the weight in the wheel near the hub, then it'll be easy for me to accelerate and speed up. But then if I could somehow get the weight near the rim, then that would actually help me to be able to power up hills and keep my momentum if I could just sort of shift where the weight was. So I went to that great tool of designers and architects throughout the ages, Microsoft Paint, and I clicked little black pixels onto a white document and I drew out a schematic of what this might look like. Really thick spoked wheels with weights on the inside that had springs, and as the centrifugal force built up, they'd move towards the rim, and you would end up with this perfect world. At slow speeds, the weight is near the axle. As you speed up, it moves out towards the rim. Bonza. This is it. I'm going to change the world. I kid you not, I printed that out, and I faxed it to the Australian Institute of Sport at 12 years of age. Sincerely believing, because my phone number was down the bottom of that document, that I was going to get a phone call from a very excited person who was going to tell me that we were going to keep on winning golds in cycling from now until forevermore because of this amazing invention. It's been 23 years and I'm starting to lose hope. I don't think that phone call's coming. Somehow they don't want to add 6 kilograms worth of weight to the wheels of their bicycles. Who knew? So nothing came out of that exercise. But think about what that exercise involved me doing and compare that back to the idea of words, numbers and people, and think about the lessons that I learned. 2 years later, I was delivering newspapers for the Leader newspaper group, little local newspapers. I'd fold them up and put them in people's letterboxes, which was all good. The problem was there were some much cooler paper delivery boys than me that delivered some of the other papers, and they were wrapped in plastic and they got to throw them. That was cool. Folding them, putting them in letterbox, not so much. So I wanted to find a way to be able to throw my newspapers just like the cool kids. So I thought about it. I thought, why aren't Leader newspapers wrapping their newspapers in them? I thought, well, it's probably an extra cost, right? It's like a whole extra process. There's materials involved, the time involved, the machines. So if I'm going to convince them to let me wrap and throw their newspapers into people's front yards so I can be one of the cool delivery boys, I'm going to have to find a way for them to make a profit doing it. Can you see the little capitalist in me coming through at 14 years of age? So I thought, what if they printed advertising on that plastic wrap? And you can say to companies, the very first impression that will get made when someone goes outside and picks up their newspaper is going to be your brand. You get the very first say. Not a bad plan. So I rang companies that manufactured the plastic bags and the plastic wrap, and I found out how much it was going to cost to buy. I found out how much it was going to cost to print on, and I found out how much it was going to cost to ship and supply out to the people who were delivering the newspapers, so that when we got the newspapers, we could fold them up and put them in the plastic sleeves with printing on them. I did the whole business model. You know what I did then? I printed it all out. I was smarter this time. I didn't fax it to some anonymous person. I used the phone book. Google was, sort of around, but not. I used the phone book, and I looked up the address of where I needed to send it, and I put it in a real envelope, and I posted it. And I waited for the phone to ring. And it did. They rang me up. They were very impressed with the whole proposal, and they were very, very kind to me and invited me around, and I toured the whole facility, and they showed me a bunch of stuff about how printing works in the press and everything else, and told me very kindly and politely that they were never, ever going to start wrapping their newspapers, no matter what the economic model might look like. But think about the lessons that I learned in that process. And now the opportunity to actually have stood there and talked to some senior people in this organisation at 14 years of age and have conversations with them that they would never have had with a 14-year-old kid on the street. Then finally, I was fast forward about another 2 years, 16 years of age. I was doing industrial cleaning at the time. I started working full-time when I was 14. That's another story. I was doing industrial cleaning at the time. I got a phone call from one of my contacts who said, hey, there's a factory near you that wants their ceiling replaced over the Easter long weekend, which is a week and a half away. I don't have time to make that happen. Can you make it happen? Whatever money you make out of the deal, just take it. I don't know anything about ceilings. I'd never heard of this company before, but I said, okay, sure, I'll give it a go. So I got on my push bike. It was a mountain bike by then, not the BMX I had when I was 12. So I'd upgraded and put on a suit, what little suit I had, and I rode down to this company, parked the bike around the corner, locked it against a chain link fence with my helmet, made sure my hair wasn't like helmet hair, wasn't too bad, and I walked in. And I said, hey, I've just been called by Paul. He sent me in to sort out this ceiling for you. Can I have a look at it? And I said, sure, come on through, have a look at the ceiling. Had a look at the ceiling, it definitely needed replacing. I don't know the first thing about replacing ceiling, but I could tell that one needed to be replaced. So I went back home, bicycle, made sure I didn't ride past the factory. I rode a different way so they wouldn't see me on the bicycle. And I opened up the telephone book and I started ringing contractors and plasterers. Incredibly, and as an adult now, this baffles me, I don't know how this happened. I successfully got 3 different tradespeople to show up and quote on the job. How does that happen? I can't even get that to happen as a 35-year-old, but as a 16-year-old, I managed. I put 2 of the quotes to the client with a recommendation that they take a particular one. They agreed. They came in, they did the job over the Easter long weekend. The client were happy, they paid me, I paid the subcontractor, and I stood there at the door of my house as the subcontractor walked away. I paid him in cash. I didn't know why he wanted cash, but I figured that's easy for me. I can just give him cash. And I stood there with $200 in my hand, left over. Happy customer, happy contractor, happy me. And I learnt more about life in that moment, standing behind the front door of my house after it closed, than I think I could have been taught by any lecturer in any classroom in the world. That, for me, is the beauty of homeschooling. I think the difference between a good education and a not so good education is the size of the world that you see as you are brought into adulthood, as you are prepared for adult life. Being educated inside an institution too often is like being pent up in that prison and peeking over the walls to get glimpses of the outside world as they take you on an excursion, or you do a week of work experience, or these various little activities that they organise for you. You're learning about the world as a theoretical exercise from the outside. Someone just leaned on the button. Thank you. Where in homeschooling, if it's done right, and it can be done wrong, that's another conversation, but if it's done right, homeschooling opens up this amazing world where you learn about the world and you prepare for adulthood by living in the world and engaging with the adults that inhabit it. I'm very, very grateful for having been homeschooled, and I invite any questions that anyone may have after this session, or even later on, just stop me and ask any questions you may have. Thank you very much.